Hello, everyone. Welcome to the West Virginia Author Show. I'm your host, Kat Pleska. And this afternoon, I'm going to welcome a longtime friend of mine who's made his way from West Virginia and to Mississippi, and we're happy to have him back. Please welcome Elliot Parker.
Hi, Kat. Delighted to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Delighted to see you here. It's been a long time since I've seen you actually in person.
It has been a long time.
Yeah. You went down to Ole Miss, Mississippi, like, I'm busy.
Right. It's been a good change. Been a good change.
Well, good. Well, so tell me, how did you wind up at Ole Miss?
Well, that's really an interesting question. I had been working. I've been working in Huntington for quite a while. I had taught at Marshall University for a while. I had taught at Mount West Community and Technical College for a while, and I was looking for a change. I was looking for something a little different, and I had realized that really kind of where I was, I had hit the ceiling, as they say, professionally.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do some other things outside of what I was doing, and I had been looking for other places that could give me an opportunity to do some other things outside of what I had been doing, mm-hmm. which was mostly teaching, business and technical writing, literature courses, and I wanted a chance to work with teaching and learning centers for teaching and learning and helping mm-hmm. faculty become better teachers in the classroom. And mm-hmm. I found the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, had that sort of hybrid spot where I do a little bit of that and a little bit of what I had been doing here in West Virginia. So I applied, and the next thing you know, I got offered the job. So
that's just wonderful.
It's been
wonderful. Great. That's a big school, isn't it? So, do you know about how many students they serve? Do you remember?
We have about 23,000, a little under 24,000 on the Oxford campus, and then the medical school is in Jackson, which is about 2 hours south. And then graduate students and doctorate students factored in. So we have probably somewhere between, if you factor all those folks in, about 28,000 students.
Yeah, that's a nice high school.
Yeah.
And it's very old and venerable school,
It
isn't it?
is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And has a lot of characteristics with West Virginia, too.
Yeah, well, Mississippi, West Virginia, we jockey for usually the bottom.
We're always 49th and 50th and all those government metrics, right?
Good old Mississippi. Okay, so before we get into the particulars about your writing and your books, I don't think I've ever discussed this on here before, and I'd like to. Tell us about your book tour. Like, how do you begin that? How does that start, and how do you plan that?
That's a great question, and I feel like I've done it differently every time. I don't know if I followed the exact same blueprint. I sort of start largely outside and then come inside. So I start broad, or sort of the 30,000 foot view of a book tour, and then work my way in. So I always try to go to at least one or two what I consider big book events, big book festivals, big national book festivals. I was at the Louisville Book Festival earlier this month, in October, which was very good. I've been to the Southern Festival of Books in Nashville. I've been to the Ohioana Book Festival in Columbus before. So I always try to pick one or two really large events to go to. And I schedule those first, and then I kind of work my way back. And then I work back to Kentucky and Ohio and West Virginia, where I went to school and lived and taught for a long time. And then I'll work my way back even further from that after I think about some places there and do more local things, around the Mississippi area. So I kind of start big, work back smaller. And that really helps me. But you really have to be careful, though, because what I've discovered is if you really want to, you could be doing something every weekend.
Yeah.
And that leads to, I think, burnout on that aspect, and also leads to burnout in your other duties of life, your job and getting laundry done and things like that.
Yes.
But yeah, that's how you do it, and that's how I do it. And like I said, I go to different ones. I don't always go to the same places for every book, but it's worked really, really well, and it helps manage. You get to meet different readers, different audiences, helps manage your time better, manage your budget better if you're covering some of the costs. So that works really well in terms of structuring a tour.
Yeah. Now, do your you've got a number of different publishers, so do they ever help with the book tour to help set things up or recommend you? Or
they do.
Okay.
And some are different. Some will say, when you're having that marketing publicity discussion before the book comes out, where do you want to go? Where are some places you've been or places you'd like to go? And they'll reach out. Sometimes it is, they'll come to you and say, pick one really big book festival you want to go to, like the Southern Festival of Books at Nashville, and we'll help pay for some of the costs.
Oh, nice.
So it just depends on the publisher, but I think it's important to have those discussions before the book comes out so that there's
That's
no
true.
surprises.
That's
no
right.
surprises
That's
when
right.
it does come out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of publishers don't have the budget anymore to do anything. So it's good to know, how am I going to manifest this, and how's that going to hit my pocketbook? And a lot of people don't understand that for the most part, authors now got to put all their money out there, before they even begin to get any royalties or money for their book.
Yeah, I tell a lot of writers when people ask me that question about marketing and publicity and book tours and
Yes.
how much should I put into this or how much should I be willing to put in? And my answer is always certainly, don't not pay your bills for book publicity and marketing.
Right.
Make sure that you take care of what's most important first.
Yeah.
But I say, a good ballpark range, if you're really wanting to do some real publicity, and this includes not only going to book festivals and lodging and gas and meals, but this includes printing flyers, bookmarks, promotional
Yeah,
materials,
that's
which
right.
have gone up like everything else in terms
Yes.
of price and cost.
Yes.
I tell folks, you need to think about $3,500 to $5,000.
Okay.
And that gives you enough of a cushion to where if you don't spend that much, you can always save that for something else or for the next book. But be prepared to put that much of your own money into it, and that way you won't be surprised. But you'll be able to have a good marketing publicity project.
Yeah, I mean, you're out there, you're selling books, so in the end, it's going to come back to you.
It is.
Because you're reaching a much wider audience to begin with, especially when you're talking about going from 30,000 foot, right, and down, and in. So that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about it. Thanks for that advice.
Oh, sure.
So, how long have you been writing?
I started writing really back when I was in 8th grade. My 8th grade English teacher, Mr. Cyrus, was a huge influence. He would always ask me in the hallway and things, what are you writing? What are you working on? And I would tell him, and he would give me these little quotes, writing quotes on postcards, and he'd say, here, put this in your pocket, read it for later. And so he was the first person that really kind of looked at me and saw some talent. And then I started writing really ever since then more seriously, and it wasn't until I was a senior in college at Marshall, and my friend Zach was starting a literary club, a creative writing club at the university, and we decided that year, we had folks in that group that were poets and playwrights and fiction, nonfiction, everything. We decided to send something out at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I did, and this is, of course, before Submittable and all these things, and you had to do the old self-addressed stamped envelope, type mailings,
Yes,
to go to the
yeah.
post office, which some people don't even know what that is now, and do all that. But and a literary journal, Spec, literary journal at Mary Washington College, which I think is Mary Washington University now in Virginia, published it. And that was the first time I ever had a creative piece published in that way. And so I got the writing bug. I got bitten by the writing bug really from that point forward.
Yeah.
And I've been just writing ever since. So that was probably in 2002 or 3.
Okay.
So really like
Okay.
writing
21
creatively.
years
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Okay, very seriously concentrating on writing and getting your books out there and getting published and getting them out there. Okay, so who are your influences? Tell the audience what genres you write in and who your influences are.
Yeah, I write mostly mysteries and thrillers.
Okay.
That was the genre as a kid I loved to read. Like I loved all the Hardy Boys books, the
Oh, yeah.
Encyclopedia Brown mysteries. Scholastic used to have those great choose your number mysteries where you would, you'd read to a certain page, and if you wanted Joan to make this decision, turn to page 16. If you wanted her to do this, you turned to page
wow.
32. So you ended up getting 2 books in one because you wanted
Yeah.
to see what she did with this set of decisions and then what she did with
Wow.
those sets of decisions. So that was always my favorite genre to read, and also write short stories. And
Yeah.
I love short stories. I feel like as a writer, I learned how to master so many writing skills from writing short stories.
Yeah.
Dialogue and diction and the ability to hold a reader from page to page. You really learn that in short stories because you only have 7,500 words or so
That's
to
right.
tell that story.
Right.
So I would say influences for me, my 2 all-time favorite writers, John Steinbeck's probably my favorite classical writer.
Oh, wow.
I think his book East of Eden, which he did not win the Pulitzer Prize for, he won it for Grapes of Wrath, but I
Right.
think East of Eden is his best book, and it's a masterpiece of fiction and storytelling, and it's basically his interpretation of the Cain and Abel story from the Bible.
Yes.
So it's a wonderful book, and I love the way he describes setting, and I love the way that he makes really bad characters humanized, and to where you don't like them and you don't approve of what they do in his books, but you understand
Yeah.
to some degree why you do or
Yeah.
why they do what they do.
Yeah.
And then Pat Conroy was probably my favorite
Oh, yeah.
contemporary writer.
Yeah,
And
I remember you and Carter Taylor Seton talking about
Yes.
which one of you were fanning the most?
Yes, yes.
The fans of him.
And he's been gone now several years, and this
Yeah.
is the time of year. He didn't have a book come out every October, but October was always when his latest book comes out, and every October I always think about, oh man, there's not going to be another
I know.
Pat Conroy book.
I
So
know.
so those two writers really, but there's been others too. Zora Neale Hurston is a big
Yes.
influence.
Oh, yeah.
Willa Cather was one.
wow.
Walter Mosley. I mean, just so many.
Yeah.
But it all really started with Steinbeck and Conroy. That's what really got me
well,
going.
those are good influences. Well, so let's go ahead and talk about your two latest books. You said earlier that these two had come out 6 months apart.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with A Table for Two. And it's a collection of stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it says, you're talking about in here the belief of the antagonists, which are the people or things that keep the main character from getting what they want. In these stories is that who needs to talk when there is action that needs to be done. So that's very intriguing, a very interesting way of looking at that. So tell us about A Table for Two, these short stories.
Yeah, thank you for reading that quote too, because that really gets at the heart of what's happening in those stories. And basically, there are 10 stories in that collection. There's multi-genre stories represented there. So there's a romance story in there, a romance themed. There's a mystery thriller. There's a little bit of a speculative fiction story in there, and a lot of other things in between. But the driving force and the driving plot point in all of those stories is conversations between two characters.
Okay.
So two characters, it's a father and a son. It's a husband and his fiance. It is two men in the story The River whose sons have gone missing on a fishing trip, and they're trying to find out what happened to them. And so you find out so much about these two individuals through the conversations that they're having, but also kind of the circumstances that have brought them together. And you have sometimes characters manipulating one another, like one character knows something that he's trying not to tell the other character. You sometimes have just a good old-fashioned disagreement over something sort of mundane in the routine of life. I was talking about that story, The River, that's in there. When you have these two fathers, one father is taking a very sort of business-like approach to finding what happened to their sons, and then the other father is just so stricken with grief that he doesn't really know what he's doing or why he's doing what he's doing. And so the impetus for that really came from post-COVID, and I hate to talk about COVID because I feel like it's the boogeyman and it's going to come out from behind the chair and get us. But I heard so much people say after COVID and even during COVID, what I miss most is coffee dates with friends, lunch with friends, those one-on-one conversations that were taken away from us for so long.
Wow, that's an interesting.
And so that got me thinking, what if you had a collection of stories where the driving plot device was just these two-person conversations?
Oh, wow.
And so it was also a great help for me because I feel like as a writer, one of my weaknesses is dialogue. In terms of making it move and not making all the characters sound the same and not having sort of the Days of Our Lives dialogue where characters are talking past each other, And so that was a great challenge too. It really helped me strengthen and hone in on making dialogue better and improving as a writer with dialogue. So it was a challenging collection of stories to write, but so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because, you've been writing for 21 years, seriously, but there's always something to learn as a writer, always something to get a little better at, doing. And so I think that reinforces the idea that people think, okay, I've got this book and okay, I'm done. Well, no, not really. You need to keep learning.
That's true.
So why don't you read, a couple of pages here from a story?
Yeah, sure.
And from A Table for Two.
I will. I'm going to read the story from The River. I talked about it just a minute ago. And the reason I'm reading this is because I've gotten so much feedback from readers through email and Facebook messages and website comments about this story. And I thought I would just read a couple of pages here. And this is one story, too, that a lot of readers have said, boy, you've got to make a novel out of this. I want to know more about these characters. And I'm like,
Good idea.
Maybe I'll come back to that someday.
Absolutely.
So I'll just read the first couple pages to kind of set the story. And this is titled The River. Jeb closed his eyes and let the mist from the Mississippi River lick his face. An image of his son, Tyler, tumbled in his mind. On the other side of the boat, Jeb's friend Clint let out a grunt and pressed down on the throttle. The whirring sound of the motor created a high-pitched whine as the grinding fan blade kicked up exhaust and pushed it near their seats. The river had been muddied from a thunderstorm earlier in the week, and now the water had eddied in heavy swirls. Jeb felt his stomach churn and seize, the remnants of an early lunch nearly making him sick. Clint always insisted that they eat lunch before going out onto the river. Today, Clint brought their lunch from his house, wrapped in foil and stuffed into 2 large plastic bags. Mary got up this morning and put old juicy meatloaf for us in the oven. She made us some sandwiches from it, Clint had proudly announced, the ends of his words elongated in a typical Mississippi drawl. Jeb had swallowed a laugh. Mary was a terrible cook, but she liked to try. Jeb and Clint had been friends for a long time because Tyler and Mitch became friends playing Little League baseball and soccer together. Jeb's wife Rita and Mary forged a close friendship on those scorching spring afternoons and frigid fall mornings, preparing and serving food and drinks inside the concession stands during the games. As his stomach gurgled, Jeb wished he and Clint had met at the landing bar near the pond like usual and ate cheeseburgers and drank root beer, but Clint had been insistent that they meet at the boat docks about 4 miles away. Clint told Jeb it would put them farther up the river and closer to the clearing. Jeb decided not to argue. Today would be bad enough without adding another argument to it. As Jeb looked out over the stern of the boat downriver, tree-lined shores whipped by in smeared blazes of green and light brown. He coughed for a moment, pushing back the bile that formed in his throat as he thought about Tyler and their search to find him and Clint's son, Mitch. His stomach had already soured from the anxiety. Jeb reached into his pocket and unspooled a locket connected to a silver scalloped chain. Inside the locket was a picture of Tyler. The photograph had been taken by Rita on the morning that Tyler and Mitch had gone on a weekend fishing trip on a shoreline where a bend in the Mississippi River churned and pushed the vigilant water upstream. It would be the last time Jeb would see his son.
Oh, wow. Ooh,
so it just
that's
kind
a
of
good
picks
place
up from
to
there.
end there, Elliot. So readers, get the book so you'll know what happens. So that's wonderful. So all of the stories are based on that dialogue back and forth between a couple of people, that push and pull, that truth and lies and reality and unreality.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And someone's not totally being honest with the other character. Even if their intentions are not to deceive,
Right.
it just happens because they're protecting some information
Yeah.
that they don't want the other person to know for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, that's very much like what everybody does.
Absolutely.
Really, depending on who they're talking to, or almost anybody, really. So so you also write novels. So is it difficult to keep it to that short, how short stories are shorter in length, and then switch to a much longer drawn out story in a novel? How do you navigate that?
That's a great question. I have found that almost the inverse is true. When I was writing Double Crossed, which was a challenging book for me, but a great story and one that I loved working on, but it took me about 3 years because there was a lot of complex circumstances, which we can talk about in just a minute in terms of putting it together. And so I found myself when I was stuck writing Double Crossed, or I had gotten myself into a situation where I'd written a character into a corner, as we often do as writers.
Yes.
And I was thinking, how am I going to get him out of this circumstance?
Yeah.
And I'd mull it over, and couldn't make any progress. I would step away from that for a while and go work on a short story.
Okay.
And so that's really where Table for Two kind of came from, was those moments where I'd gotten sort of pigeonholed and double-crossed and couldn't get my brain or my characters out of a certain situation I'd put them in, and went to Table for Two and would work on the stories. And so that kept my creative process working. It kept me thinking. It kept me writing. It didn't slow down that momentum. It just sort of changed my perspective a little bit.
Okay.
And then when it came time to go back to Double Cross, when I had done enough with those stories, then suddenly I had seen things in the text that I had written that I hadn't seen before. And I'm like, oh yes, now I know how I can get him out of here, or I know what I need to do, what they need to say to each other to move the chapter along.
Right.
So they worked really kind of simultaneously in that way. Okay. But in terms of a novel, I think a novel in many ways is just a series of smaller short stories. Or what I tell students who are film people that love film and love writing screenplays, a novel is just a series of scenes like you'd watch in a movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And ultimately, your goal is your character wants something from the very first page in chapter 1.
Right.
And at the end of the chapter, are they closer to getting what they want, or have they been pushed back?
Yeah.
And if they've been pushed back, how are you going to get them, back to where they need to be? Sort of that one step forward, 2 steps back approach. So the short stories help me a lot.
Yeah,
with that.
it helps you build tension. Too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about Double Crossed,
Okay.
a novel. Excuse me, one of those fall allergy deals. So, is this part of the a series? I mean, this is the second in a series,
Yeah,
right?
this is the third book in my Ronan McCullough
Third book.
series, and
Okay.
he is a Charleston, West Virginia police detective.
Yes.
And in this particular story, he is investigating the body, the charred body of a federal agent that has been found on the west side of Charleston.
Okay.
And and it really picks up almost immediately after the end of book 2, which was A Knife's Edge. So literally a week or two passes
Okay.
before this happens.
Okay.
Ronan is on leave because of what happened at the end of A Knife's Edge, and he just can't help himself. He has to stick his nose in to this investigation. Well, he comes to find out that there's a reason that federal agent was found murdered.
Yeah.
And then there is an explosion down by the riverfront going on at the same time that this body has been discovered. And so at first it looks like they're just two isolated incidents, but then Ronan starts to figure out that they are connected in some way. And so the main sort of antagonist in this book involves a story of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all of those different kinds of things. And I've gotten really interested and fascinated in that. I've been fascinated in it and for a long time. And I read, I don't know, dozens of books, watched all kinds of interviews, documentaries. The research, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm still not sure I understand what Bitcoin is. Someone asked me, how would I describe it? And I said, it's sort of like Monopoly money, but you can actually spend it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's real, but it's not real, but yet you can use it. But the thing that makes it so interesting on a criminal aspect is it can't be traced. There is no government agency that regulates it. There is no government agency that can go after it and track it.
Right.
And so that's really what pops up as the main thrust of the antagonist in that story is Ronan is chasing, he's used to chasing like actual people that are living and breathing, and now he's chasing a pile of numbers.
Wow.
And he's got to figure out who created the numbers, why did they create the numbers,
Yeah.
who's behind it, and it's unlike any kind of investigation he's ever done before.
Wow.
And so he's really, really stressed and really, really pulled in a variety of different directions.
Yeah.
And nobody in his department understands really what to do either. So he's sort of out here on his own trying to lead the investigation because nobody else can really fall back. He can't fall back on anybody else and have them help him.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of other, murders and terrible things that happen along
Yes,
the way,
of
red
course.
herrings and all of
Crime
that.
thriller, of
Crime
course.
thriller, absolutely. But yeah, it was so much fun writing about a villain that is a set of numbers, that is not a living, breathing
Interesting.
human being. So
That's a
it's
very interesting
so
concept.
much fun. Yeah, so much fun.
Well, read a couple of pages for us
Okay.
from Double Cross.
Sure thing. I will. I thought I would read maybe from chapter 3, which is where Ronan finds the body of the federal agent that I was talking about a moment ago. And this comes in chapter 3, and I'll just read a few paragraphs here.
Okay.
Ronan McCullough examined the identification card through the clear plastic evidence bag. One side of the charred ID had the name Jeremy Gerard in faded black ink etched across the bottom. When he turned the bag over, he saw a faded blue seal emblazoned with the words Department of Homeland Security printed below it. Ronan clenched the bag in his hand and dropped his chin. Shit. Ronan held his breath and cut a sharp glance at the remnants of a charred body lying just a few feet in front of him. He cut a sharp look at Chris Keenan. Like Ronan, he had earned a promotion from corporal and was now working with the investigations division of the Charleston Police Department. It still felt weird to Ronan to have the kids standing next to him on a possible homicide scene, but here they were investigating their first case as a new team, and it appeared to be a big one. Who called this in? Keenan had taken notes on a small pad that he pulled from the breast pocket of his navy blue uniform. He held out his tongue and streaked the tip of a thin finger over it, dropping it and turning a page in the notepad with a crisp pull. A motorist, George Lewis, 79 years old. Keenan turned his head to the left and gazed down Park Avenue. The cracked concrete road disappeared into a wide gulf of blackness behind them, only punctuated with strobes of blue and red lights from emergency vehicles filling the space. Mr. Lewis lives a couple of blocks down on Park, closer to the boulevard. He was driving home after going to Kroger's on the west side for some coffee and milk. Ronan nodded. Keenan pointed up to the traffic light that hung on the wired line above them. The light was red when Mr. Lewis looked over. He saw flames. Ronan tossed a look up at the light and then back over the field behind the body. Jesus, he's coming through a red light and sees a man burning to death. Ronan also learned from Keenan that the Charleston Fire Department from Station 2 had responded first. The station was located on the other side of a viaduct that divided Virginia Street between the sloped hills of the West Side residential area and the flat, more sprawling business district. It would have taken them 5 minutes to get to the scene. For a house fire, having firefighters and paramedics close by would likely keep a structure fire from becoming a disaster. When it involved a burning body, it was too much time and too much distance.
Whew. goodness.
So
and
that's
I
fun.
love how you just wander around Charleston. I'm not from Charleston. Now you are.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So you grew up here, so you're very familiar. Do you come back, cities change, so do you come back to Charleston and kind of scope out what the changes are before you put them in a book?
Oh,
or something like
absolutely.
that?
Because I want it to be not dated
Right.
time period wise, but if I mention a building that's no longer there and hasn't been there for a while,
Yeah.
or a business is called something else, maybe it was a restaurant at one time and now it's a storage facility,
Yeah.
that needs to be mentioned. I mean, and I try to, not use real names and places unless the owners give me permission. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But I want to make sure if somebody is from this area or familiar with this area and they say, well, no, that hasn't been a restaurant for 5 years. It's
Yeah.
now a storage unit or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I want to try to get that accuracy as close as I
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. So the next book in the series might have a few Charleston changes in that too.
Yes. I've got some ideas in mind for what the next book is going to be. My goal is to have a 6-book series with these characters.
Oh, wow.
Ronan can't work forever. He's in his early 40s. He's getting to that point where
Well,
some
he's going
of
to
these
retire. He's a
is.
policeman.
He
They
is going to retire
in their later 40s.
Yeah. So, and he's starting to realize now, and he does this in Double Crossed. He has these moments where he thinks, how much longer can I do this and do this effectively?
Yeah.
And so he's going to be grappling with that in the next book, but also solving an investigation where he's going to get a call from. I've already kind of got the open started. He's going to get a call from his partner, and they find a body, they find someone murdered, and they find a cell phone, and the person was trying to call Ronan. He had Ronan's number on the phone.
Yeah.
So we're going to figure out who that is and why was he calling
Okay.
Ronan. So
Okay.
it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, good. I bet the 6 books. That's a lot. There's a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of thinking. But if you could think that far into the future with that many stories, that's terrific.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And people who follow you, your fans, your readers, will really appreciate that you just keep on trucking along with the stories. That's wonderful. We've got a couple of minutes here, so I just want to ask you about, you do a podcast, right? Now Appalachia?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Now Appalachia, it's carried by the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, which is out of Jupiter, Florida, is where they're based. The podcast is heard on all the different podcast platforms, iTunes, Podbean, Spotify. We have listeners all over Appalachia, all over the United States, and we are in and distributed in 130 countries throughout the world.
Wow.
So we have listeners in England, we have listeners in India, the Middle East. I mean, you name it, we've got folks listening.
And it's Now Appalachia.
And it's Now Appalachia.
That's what I love about that it's getting way out there to really keep people informed on what Appalachia really is.
Absolutely. And we want to profile the authors and the publishers from this region.
Okay.
And the authors that are publishing, the publishers that are publishing the work of these Appalachian writers, because what I've discovered and what I hope our listeners are discovering is we are such a rich place for great storytelling. And I would put our authors up against any other authors from any other part of the country or any other continent or any other part of the world
exactly right.
in terms of quality and storytelling and mastery of language.
Yes.
It's amazing. In fact, when I hear from listeners of the podcast who listen to it regularly, they will say, my goodness, I had no idea. I've read so-and-so's book and I had no idea they had this connection to Appalachia. Or they'll say, I love hearing this author describe why they love Appalachia, and I want to come visit. I've never been there. Or the only thing I know about Appalachia is what I see on the news, which oftentimes is not a flattering portrait, unfortunately. And so that synergy and that dialogue that exists is great. But it's a lot of fun. I've met so many great authors and so many great publishers through that process.
Yes, it's absolutely wonderful, and I'm glad you're doing that. And you're that's giving back to everybody who supports you. So, real quick, you have 2 cats?
Yes. Buddy and
Their names
Layla.
are Buddy and Layla.
Layla
Buddy.
just turned 17, and Buddy will be 9 in January, and Layla is just as sassy at 17 as she was at 1.
Thank you for being here, Elliot. I really appreciate it. And so long to everybody from West Virginia Author. I'm your host, Kat Pluska, and I'll see you next time.